Chapter 6. Shari'a, the Law of Islam, the Mullahs Unveiled. Was it ever stated that the purpose of the revolution was a religious one, and one that would empower the Ayatollah Khomeini with authority to apply Sharia law in Iran? Never. The intention was supposedly a socio-political revolution that would ensure the equal and just distribution of wealth among Iranians by the vote of the people. Why would a righteous Islamic leader change his mind and betray his nation? He did it, obviously, to gratify his lust for power, even at the cost of his fellow Muslims and countrymen, aligning himself with the political philosophy of Islam. Khomeini's manipulations were so subtle and clever that it never occurred to the people that he was deceiving them, and the enforcement of Sharia established his absolute supremacy over every individual in power in Iran. Even the elected president could not exercise his own power without the supreme leader's approval. The default on Khomeini's promises was the beginning of unlimited persecution and bloodshed in Iran. His companion mullahs in power killed even their own children, relatives, and friends who criticized them. The Ayatollah Shari'a Madari, who had millions of followers and had rescued the Ayatollah Khomeini from the death penalty in 1963 under the rule of the Shah, was imprisoned by the Ayatollah Khomeini himself. Under his supremacy, his own grandson was taken into prison, and his own son died mysteriously. Great scholars and revolutionaries were humiliated, tortured, and murdered. Before the revolution, we encouraged people to join the revolutionaries for a better Iran. We promised them that our situation would be far better than it had been under the Shah, but now we were embarrassed because of the Ayatollah Khomeini's betrayal, since we had encouraged people to follow him for a democratic Iran. The freedom and opportunities under the Shah were not ideal, but they were far more humane to what the Ayatollah Khomeini was offering to people. Also, we as committed Muslims had wanted to unite our nation for the destruction of Israel and her ally America, but we never wished to humiliate our own fellow citizens and create disunity. It had been encouraging to us that under the leadership of the Ayatollah Khomeini, the revolutionaries were able to establish Hezbollah, the Army of Allah, in Iran and then in Lebanon as an extension and satellite of Iranian military intelligence to support the neighboring anti-Jews. Now, we worried that the internal disunity would hold us back in both our national and international goals. We never knew that the mullahs would start with pro-democratic attitudes but demand absolute allegiance in the name of Islam later. We just did not see it coming. We did not know that they would hate Iranian culture and would enforce ancient Saudi Arabian culture to dominate the lives of Iranians. We were proudly calling ourselves Muslims, yet did not know that any disobedience to the mullahs would cost us our lives and our country. It never even entered our minds that the mullahs would slaughter even their own children for the sake of removing opposition. The mullahs knew that in the long run, they would not be able to lead Iranians for their cause because Iranians were rational people who loved democracy. Therefore, they did whatever it took to gain control over the country's weapons, wealth, business, and every other thing to permanently silence any opposition. Their irrational thoughts and disorderly actions created economic chaos, and the gap between rich and poor became wider and wider. They ignored the desperate need of the nation, but invested billions of dollars for the sake of terrorism via Syria in order to strengthen anti-Israeli militias in Lebanon and Palestine. The poor were quickly forgotten. The mullahs who had once spoken harshly against a luxurious lifestyle now admired it. Though poverty prevailed everywhere in the country, the mullahs became rich and lascivious. They were blaming the people for their poverty, saying that a person would not be poor if he or she obeyed the Ayatollah Khomeini wholeheartedly. I remember the day the Ayatollah Shayesteh, a close companion of the Ayatollah Khomeini, visited a northern city in Iran and passed through our city. The local mullah in power asked him to make a short stop in our city so the Ayatollah Khomeini's zealous followers could send their greeting to him via his close friend. He stopped in the biggest mosque in town. Both the men's and women's sections of the mosque were packed full. Among many other questions, one particular question was directed to him by a young mother. She was crying and said to him that her family did not have enough food, and therefore she was weak and unable to produce milk for her newborn baby. She also did not have money to buy powdered milk to feed her baby. To the astonishment of all, he raised his voice loudly and repeated the saying, "We have the Ayatollah Khomeini as our leader in this country. That means we are rich." This was the response to a young mother who was worrying about her child and pouring out her tears for the hunger threatening the life of her new baby. The mullahs' contempt for people was obvious in every aspect of life. Some of them raped younger girls and boys who were sent to them to learn the Quran. A day did not go by that a mullah did not rape a child. Girls who tried to refuse them were accused baselessly, imprisoned, tortured, and even killed. If a girl opposed the mullah's rule and received the death sentence, and she was a virgin, the mullahs raped her before killing her. This was so that she would fall into the category of an infidel sex slave or a concubine, so under Islamic law her murder would not be a sin. Men who opposed the mullahs were imprisoned and humiliated by every kind of unethical word, tortured and killed. The mullahs had a license to utter any unethical and immoral word and do whatever they liked with the prisoners. No one was able to criticize them anymore. Criticism of them was interpreted as criticism of Muhammad and Allah, and the penalty was death. One mullah, the Ayatollah Hassani, who was also a judge, killed his own 2 sons because they opposed the Ayatollah Khomeini. I decided to leave Tehran and go to my hometown where there was no political or religious tension yet. I thought that away from Tehran I could perhaps do something for my nation and stay faithful to our promises to the people. I could serve and encourage them so together we could raise our country to democracy and to a better future. I needed to focus more on serving people than involving myself in a struggle for power. I also wanted to prove that as a member of the revolution, I could be true to my promises. I was also ready to speak out against the tensions and discrimination imposed by the mullahs in Tehran if I was asked. I began my ministry by teaching younger people that the communist belief of our northern neighbor, Russia, was baseless compared to religious philosophy that believed in God and the creation. I believe this would encourage them to stand against the spread of communism and Russian influence in Iran and attach themselves strongly to Islam. This also gave me an opportunity to unite the younger people to help them prepare themselves for rebuilding our country with Islamic values, spreading Islam internationally, and for aiding the Palestinians and the Shiite militias against Israel in the future. I worked hard to attract younger people to engage themselves in my teachings and to attend camps where fighting, terrorist, and suicide bombing techniques were taught.